I watched them kneel before me, their hands trembling, their eyes swollen from crying. "Please, Emily, we were wrong. We'll do anything. Just don't ruin us." The sound of my father's voice begging, after years of treating me like I was nothing, was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. My mother clutched his arm, shaking, while my younger brother avoided my eyes, too ashamed to look at me. They were surrounded by flashing cameras, reporters shouting questions, the world watching their perfect little family's shame spill out like dirty water. I had waited for this moment. I had built it with my own hands. And as they knelt there, stripped of their pride, their wealth, their spotless reputation, I finally felt the taste of revenge. But even as I looked down at them, a strange mix of triumph and something darker twisted in my chest. They had disowned me like I was nothing. And now I had the power to destroy them. But how did it come to this? How did I go from being the quiet, invisible daughter of a wealthy family to the woman who could make them beg for mercy in front of the whole world? It didn't happen overnight. It started years ago. Before the lies, before the betrayal, before the night I nearly lost everything. And it began in a place I used to call home. My name is Emily Carter. I grew up in a mansion in the suburbs of New York with perfectly cut lawns, a white marble driveway, and parents who treated our family like a brand to be maintained. My father, Richard Carter, was a big-shot corporate lawyer who believed reputation was worth more than love. My mother, Evelyn, was the kind of woman who smiled in public but sliced you open with her words in private. I had a younger brother, Michael, the golden child. He could do no wrong, and even when he did, they found a way to blame someone else, usually me. Growing up, I learned that affection in my family came with conditions. Love wasn't free. It had to be earned. And I tried, God knows I tried, to make them see me, to make them proud. But no matter how hard I worked, I was always the disappointment. Things started to shift when I turned 17. I met Daniel, tall, charming, with dark hair and a smile that made me forget how cold my own house felt. He worked at a local coffee shop, and I'd sneak away after school to see him. He wasn't rich. He wasn't part of the world my parents lived in, but with him, I felt seen. I felt real. For a while, he was my escape. But my parents found out about him, and the night they did is burned into my memory. My father called me into his office. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. His voice was low. "I see. You will not embarrass this family by dating that boy." When I told him I loved Daniel, my father laughed. My mother just shook her head and said, "Love doesn't pay the bills." That night was the first time I thought about running away. But I didn't. I stayed. I obeyed. I let them control me because I was too scared to lose what little place I had in that house. Then came the betrayal that shattered everything. I was 21 when it happened. I had just graduated college, hoping maybe now they would finally see my worth. But instead, I found myself at the center of a scandal I didn't create. One of my father's wealthy clients accused me of theft, claiming I had stolen a diamond bracelet from their home during a party. I thought my parents would defend me, that they'd know I would never do something like that. Instead, they believed the lie. My father didn't even look at me when he said, "You've embarrassed us for the last time." My mother's words were sharper. "You're no longer part of this family. Pack your things." They threw me out, just like that. It was raining that night. I remember standing on the driveway, suitcase in hand, watching the lights in my old bedroom go dark. My brother stood in the doorway, smirking. I never forgot that. I had nowhere to go. Daniel was gone, moved out of state months earlier without even saying goodbye. Friends stopped answering my calls. I ended up in a rundown motel, sleeping on a mattress with springs that stabbed my back, staring at the ceiling and wondering if maybe my parents were right about me. But something inside me refused to die. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was anger. Or maybe it was the deep, aching knowledge that they hadn't just kicked me out. They had taken my identity, my dignity, and left me to rot. That's when the idea was born. If they wanted me gone, I would disappear. But I wouldn't stay gone. I would come back. And when I did, I would take everything they loved. Not their money. Not their house. Something far more valuable. I spent the next 2 years in the shadows, building a life they knew nothing about. I learned skills they never thought I could have, skills that could destroy reputations, dig up secrets, and expose the rot beneath perfect smiles. I made connections in places my father's world feared. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to set the trap. But before I could strike, something happened that pushed me past the point of no return. Something that made me realize I couldn't just hurt them. I had to crush them. It happened on a night I'll never forget. I had been working undercover at one of my father's charity galas, blending in with the staff. That's when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. And that's where everything changed. I was standing behind the bar, dressed in a crisp black uniform, pretending to wipe glasses while my eyes scanned the crowd. My father's charity gala was in full swing, crystal chandeliers dripping light across the room, waiters weaving through the sea of expensive gowns and tuxedos. Everyone was laughing, drinking, showing off their wealth. I was there under a fake name, working for the catering company. No one in the room knew I was Emily Carter, the daughter they had erased from existence. To them, I was just another nameless server. Then I heard it. I had just stepped into the hallway near the VIP lounge to grab more champagne when 2 men walked in. One of them was my father. The other was a man I didn't recognize, gray hair, expensive suit, the kind of face that didn't smile unless it was for business. They didn't see me. I was half hidden in the shadows. And that's when the man leaned in and said, "You know this deal will ruin them, right? We'll take the land, push them out, and no one will ever know you had a hand in it." My father chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. That's the point. If they're gone, we control the whole block. And, let's just say, accidents happen. The man laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world. My stomach twisted. I didn't understand at first. But then I caught the name they mentioned, an elderly couple who had lived next door to us since I was a kid. Sweet people. The kind who brought cookies on Christmas. And here was my father, plotting to destroy them. I froze, gripping the tray so tight my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just about shady business deals. This was about ruining lives. I knew my father was ruthless, but hearing it like that, so casual, so cold, lit a fire in me. If I needed a reason to follow through with my plan, this was it. I wasn't just getting revenge for myself anymore. I was going to make sure the world saw him for what he really was. I slipped away before they noticed me, heart pounding. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the wall, replaying their words over and over. That was when my plan changed from revenge to total annihilation. Over the next few months, I began gathering everything I could: documents, recordings, financial trails. I knew people now, people who could make things disappear, and people who could make things appear exactly where I wanted them. Every connection I made became a piece of my puzzle. But just when I thought I was in control, life decided to throw me into something darker. It started with a knock on my door one night around 11 p.m. I opened it to find Michael, my golden boy brother, standing there. I hadn't seen him in years. His hair was messier now, his suit wrinkled, his face pale. "Emily," he said, voice shaking. I need your help." I almost slammed the door in his face. But something in his eyes stopped me. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. "They're going to kill me," he whispered. Those words hit me like ice water. For a moment, I thought he was lying, trying to manipulate me. But then he stepped inside, closed the door, and pulled out a blood-stained handkerchief. "I got involved with people I shouldn't have," he said. "I owe them money. A lot. And they know who our family is. If they can't get it from me," his voice cracked, "they'll go after Mom and Dad." For the first time in years, I saw him look small, afraid. Part of me wanted to laugh in his face and tell him to choke on the same cruelty they gave me. But another part of me, the part that still remembered being his big sister when we were little, hesitated. Helping him could ruin everything I'd been building. But not helping could mean blood on my hands. I told him to sit down and tell me everything. By the time he finished, I knew one thing. Whoever was after my brother was dangerous enough to kill without blinking. And if they found out my father was worth millions, they'd see it as an open invitation. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to help him. But on one condition. He would give me everything he knew about our parents' dirty secrets. Michael hesitated, then nodded. And that's when he told me something that made my blood run cold. Something so big, so dangerous, that I realized my father's crimes went far deeper than I'd ever imagined. Something that could destroy not just his reputation but his freedom. And before I could even process it, before I could decide my next move, someone started pounding on my door. Not knocking. Pounding. The kind of pounding that meant trouble had just found me. The pounding on my door rattled the frame, sharp and heavy, like whoever was out there didn't care if they broke it down. Michael's eyes went wide. "It's them," he whispered, his voice trembling. I felt my pulse in my throat. I motioned for him to stay quiet, grabbed the small kitchen knife from the counter, and crept toward the peephole. Two men in dark hoodies stood outside. One was tapping the side of his leg impatiently, the other scanning the hallway like a predator sniffing for prey. They didn't look like the kind of people who knock twice. "Emily," Michael's voice was shaking. "We have to get out of here." I thought about calling the police, but if they were connected to the kind of people I suspected, the cops wouldn't arrive in time. And even if they did, I'd have to explain why my estranged brother was in my apartment, along with the trail of secrets I'd been digging up about our family. No. This was a problem I had to solve on my own. I grabbed my bag, shoved my laptop inside, and looked at Michael. "Back window. Now." We slipped out into the narrow alley behind the building. The winter air stung my skin, and my breath came out in pale clouds. Somewhere behind us, I heard the apartment door crash open. "They're inside," I whispered. We ran. My boots slapped against the wet pavement, every step echoing in the tight space between brick walls. Michael was panting, clutching his side. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To someone who owes me a favor," I said. 15 minutes later, we were inside a dimly lit garage on the far side of town. The air smelled like oil and rust. A man in a grease-stained jacket looked up from under the hood of an old Chevy. His face broke into a grin when he saw me. "Well, if it isn't Carter's ghost," he said. "Thought you were dead." "Not dead," I said, glancing toward Michael. "Just busy. I need a car. Something fast, and something that can't be traced." He studied me for a long moment, then tossed me a set of keys. "Second bay." "But you didn't get it from me." We didn't have time for small talk. Within minutes, Michael and I were on the road, the city lights fading behind us. It wasn't until we were miles away that I finally spoke. "Start talking. What do you know about Dad?" Michael stared out the window for a long time before answering. "You know about the real estate deals, right? How he takes property from people who can't fight back." I nodded. "That's just the surface," he said quietly. "Dad's been laundering money for years. Not just from business deals, dirty money. From people who do bad things. Dangerous people." I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. "What kind of bad things?" "Drugs. Weapons. You name it. And if anyone finds proof, he's done. Prison may be worse." I stared at the road ahead, my mind spinning. This wasn't just corporate greed. This was criminal. And if my father's connections were that deep, it meant anyone who crossed him could disappear without a trace. Michael leaned back in his seat. "Emily, the people after me? They're the same ones Dad works with. If they find out I'm talking to you, we're both dead." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the engine and the rush of the wind outside. And then, headlights flared in the rearview mirror. A black SUV. No license plate. It was following us. "Michael," I said, my voice low, "do not turn around. But we're being followed." He stiffened. "It's them." I pressed harder on the gas, the tires whining against the asphalt. The SUV matched my speed. Then, its headlights surged closer. They were trying to ram us. The impact jolted the car forward, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. Michael shouted something I couldn't hear over the roar of the engine. Another hit. I swerved hard, barely keeping the car from spinning out. We were heading toward an empty stretch of road now, the city far behind us. "Hold on," I yelled, and slammed the wheel to the right, taking a sharp turn down an unlit side road. Gravel sprayed under the tires, the SUV still on our tail. Then came a third hit, harder this time. The rear end fishtailed, and for a split second, I thought we were going to flip. Somewhere deep inside me, something cold took over. I wasn't running anymore. I was going to end this chase. I spotted a narrow dirt path between two lines of trees and jerked the car toward it. The SUV followed, but the road was uneven, riddled with deep holes. I swerved at the last second, but they didn't. The sound of metal crunching against rock echoed through the night. The SUV's front end slammed down into a ditch, the back tires spinning helplessly in the air. We didn't stop to see if they got out. I kept driving until the lights disappeared completely in the rear view. Only then did Michael speak. "Emily, what's your plan?" I looked straight ahead, my jaw set. My plan? To make sure Dad's entire empire burns to the ground. But deep down, I knew the truth. If I kept going, there was no turning back. And after what happened tonight, I also knew something else. My father's enemies weren't just after Michael. Now, they were after me. We drove until the sky began to lighten, streaks of pale gray bleeding into the darkness. My hands were stiff from gripping the wheel, but I didn't dare relax. Every headlight in the distance looked like a threat. By the time we pulled into a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, Michael was half asleep in the passenger seat. I shook him awake. "We're here. Get inside." The motel smelled like mildew and cigarettes, the carpet stained and sticky under our shoes. I paid cash for a room at the far end of the building and double-locked the door the moment we stepped inside. Michael collapsed on the bed. I didn't sit. I paced, the adrenaline still burning through my veins. If Dad's criminal ties ran this deep, then taking him down wasn't just a matter of exposing him. It was about surviving long enough to do it. And now, thanks to Michael, I was tangled in the same web. "Emily," Michael mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "You can't go up against him. You don't know how far he'll go." I stopped pacing. "Oh, I know exactly how far he'll go. He already threw me out of my own family. I've got nothing left to lose." That was a lie. I did have something to lose, my life. But if I backed down now, my father would keep destroying people, and he'd eventually come for me again. I needed leverage. Something so big, so undeniable, that even his powerful friends couldn't protect him. Michael sat up slowly. "There's a safe," he said, "in his office at home. Everything's in there, ledgers, contracts, offshore accounts. If you can get to it," he hesitated, "you could destroy him." The thought sent a chill through me. Breaking into my father's home wasn't just risky, it was suicide. His security system was tight, and he had people watching the property. But it was also the kind of risk that could end this war in one move. Still, I needed more details. "How do you know what's in the safe?" His eyes flickered. "Because I've seen it. I borrowed some cash from it once. He never found out." I gave him a long look. "Michael, if you're lying to me, I'm not. But you have to be careful. If he catches you," he didn't finish the sentence, but the look in his eyes told me enough. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled my laptop from my bag and started digging. Over the past 2 years, I'd built access to networks most people didn't even know existed, databases, leaked files, and encrypted messaging boards where information was currency. While Michael showered, I was already reaching out to one of my contacts, a hacker named Ivy who owed me a favor. If anyone could get me into that house without tripping the alarm, it was her. By noon, I had a plan. We'd go in late at night, while my parents were at another one of their charity events. Michael knew the layout. I'd handle the security. We'd grab the files, copy everything, and be out before anyone knew we were there. It sounded simple, but I knew it wouldn't be. That night, we parked 2 blocks away from the mansion. The place looked the same as the night they threw me out, pristine white walls, glowing windows, and a driveway that screamed wealth. It was almost funny how perfect it looked on the outside. No one would guess the rot inside. Ivy's tech disabled the security cameras for a 2-minute window. That was all we had. Michael slipped the side gate open with a key he'd kept hidden since childhood. We moved like shadows across the backyard, The only sounds the crunch of gravel under our shoes and the pounding of my heart. Inside, the house smelled like polished wood and expensive perfume. Memories flashed in my mind. Dinners where I wasn't allowed to speak, holidays where I sat alone while everyone else laughed. I pushed them away and focused on the mission. We reached my father's office. The safe was behind a bookshelf, just like Michael said. I knelt, entering the code Michael gave me, and with a faint click, the heavy door swung open. Stacks of cash, jewelry, and thick binders filled with documents. I reached for the nearest binder, flipping it open. My breath caught. It wasn't just business records. It was evidence of crimes, money transfers to known criminals, shipping logs that could only mean smuggling, and contracts signed with names I recognized from news reports about international arms dealers. This was it. The smoking gun. I stuffed everything into my bag, my fingers shaking. We have to go. But before I could finish, the sound of a door slamming echoed through the house. Michael's eyes widened. They're home. And then I heard it. My father's voice. Michael? Emily. The sound of my name rolling off his tongue after all these years made my blood run cold. He knew. My stomach clenched. He shouldn't have known I was here. He shouldn't have even suspected. Michael's face went pale, his eyes darting to the office door. He's not supposed to be home. I raised a finger to my lips. Don't talk. Move. We slipped behind the massive curtains that framed the floor-to-ceiling windows. My father's footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the hunt. Michael, he called again, his voice calm but heavy with something darker. I know you're here. And if Emily's with you, he paused, then chuckled softly. Well, that's even better. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I could hear him moving closer, one slow step after another, until his shadow passed across the thin fabric of the curtain. I held my breath. Then, without warning, the curtain was ripped back. My father stood there in a tailored charcoal suit, his face smooth and composed like he was greeting a guest at a dinner party. But his eyes, cold, sharp, calculating, were the same eyes that had watched me pack my bags the night he disowned me. Well, he said, glancing from me to Michael, this is a surprise. I gripped the strap of the bag with the files, ready to run. We're leaving, I said flatly. He smiled faintly. With my property? I don't think so. Michael stepped forward, trying to sound confident. Dad, you need to let us go. My father's expression barely changed, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. You think you can walk into my house, steal from me, and just leave? Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I said. I've taken proof of every crime you've ever committed. His smile vanished. You think those papers will save you? You have no idea who you're up against. And then, I saw it. The small movement of his right hand toward the inside of his jacket. I reacted before I could think, shoving Michael aside and bolting for the door. My father's voice barked something behind me, and then the sound came, sharp, deafening. A gunshot. The bullet splintered the wooden doorframe inches from my head. Michael shouted, but I didn't turn back. I sprinted through the hallway, my boots slipping on the polished floor, my lungs burning. I could hear my father's footsteps pounding after us, his voice growing louder. We hit the kitchen, and I yanked open the side door. Cold night air rushed in as we tore across the yard toward the back gate. But just as I reached for it, another figure stepped out from the shadows. Tall, broad shoulders, black leather gloves. Before I could react, his fist connected with my stomach, knocking the air from my lungs. I stumbled, gasping, as Michael lunged at him. The man swung once, just once, and Michael crumpled to the ground, unconscious. I was still trying to pull in air when my father appeared behind him, completely calm, like this was just another business deal. Emily, he said smoothly, you've made a terrible mistake. I tried to back away, but the man grabbed my arm, his grip like steel. Put her in the car, my father said. I kicked, twisted, but his hold didn't loosen. My father walked ahead, the click of his shoes on the stone path echoing in my head like a countdown. The trunk of a black sedan yawned open in the driveway. And that's when I knew this wasn't about scaring me. If I went into that trunk, I wasn't coming out alive. I didn't think. I just moved. The moment the man tried to shove me toward the open trunk, I twisted my body hard to the left, letting my own weight drop. His grip loosened for a split second, just long enough for me to drive my elbow into his ribs. He grunted, his hold slipping, and I tore free. I ran. Gravel crunched under my boots as I sprinted across the driveway. I could hear my father's sharp command, "Get her," followed by pounding footsteps closing in behind me. My chest burned, my legs screaming, but I didn't dare slow down. There was a narrow gap between the hedge and the side fence. I dove into it, scraping my shoulder against the wood, and burst out onto the street. A horn blared, headlights flashed, and I realized too late that a car was coming straight for me. I threw myself to the side just as tires screeched, the smell of burning rubber filling the air. The driver, a man in his 20s, jumped out. "Are you crazy?" I grabbed his arm. "Please, you need to get me out of here. Now." Something in my voice must have told him this was no joke, because he didn't argue. He shoved me into the passenger seat and floored it. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of my father and the man in gloves running toward us, the black sedan roaring to life behind them. "Faster," I yelled. The driver shot me a nervous glance, but pushed the car harder, weaving through side streets until the sound of the engine chasing us faded into the distance. My heart was still racing when he finally slowed down. "You gonna tell me what the hell that was about?" he asked. I shook my head. "The less you know, the better." He dropped me off at a gas station 2 towns over. I gave him a crumpled bill from my pocket and slipped into the fluorescent-lit bathroom. My reflection in the cracked mirror barely looked like me, hair tangled, eyes wild, a thin streak of blood running down my cheek from where I'd scraped the fence. I leaned against the sink, trying to slow my breathing. Michael. He was still back there. For a moment, I thought about calling the police. But I knew better. My father's influence reached deep, and one phone call could mean I'd never be seen again. If I wanted to save my brother, I'd have to do it myself. I pulled out the bag from under my jacket. Somehow, through all of it, I'd managed to keep hold of it, the files, the evidence, the proof of everything. My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers. There was more than I realized: names, dates, offshore accounts, and connections to people I'd only ever seen in headlines about international crime rings. Enough to destroy him. Enough to destroy all of them. But I couldn't just drop this in the press. If I did, they'd know it was me, and they'd hunt me down before it even made it to air. I needed a plan. A bigger plan. One that would bring him to his knees in front of the whole world, and keep me alive long enough to watch it happen. I zipped the bag shut and stepped back into the night. The air was cold, but the fire in my chest was hotter than it had ever been. He thought he could trap me. He thought he could make me disappear. But now, I had the one thing he could never take back. The truth. And I was going to use it to make Richard Carter, the man who disowned me like I was nothing, beg for mercy all over again. Only this time, he wasn't going to get it. 2 weeks. That's how long I disappeared off the map. No phone. No credit cards. No traceable moves. I hid in a safe house owned by one of my contacts, a former investigative journalist named Lena who'd spent years exposing corrupt politicians. When I showed her the files, her hands trembled. "This isn't just about your father," she said, flipping through the pages. "This is a spiderweb. If this goes public, it could pull down people in politics, law enforcement, even corporate giants. That's why they'll kill you for it." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why we're not just going to leak it, we're going to bury them." For the next week, we worked day and night. Lena called in favors from trusted journalists, lawyers, and whistleblowers. We split the files into multiple copies, sending them to people across the country with instructions to release them all at the same time. That way, no one could stop it once it started. The day came. It began with a single news broadcast, then another, then another. Within hours, my father's name was plastered across every major network. Reporters swarmed outside his home, demanding answers. The footage that followed was the part I'd waited for my entire life. My father, the man who had stood above everyone with his chin high, was now in handcuffs, being led down the steps of our once perfect mansion. My mother clung to him, sobbing into the cameras, while Michael, bruised but alive, stood behind them, eyes lowered. The charges were endless: money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, aiding organized crime. His allies, politicians, CEOs, even a police chief, were dragged into the scandal with him. That night, I stood across the street from the courthouse as they brought him in for arraignment. He saw me. For the first time, I watched fear flicker in his eyes. He stopped, yanking against the officer's grip. "Emily," he shouted. His voice cracked, not with anger, but desperation. "Please. You don't understand." I smiled. "I understand perfectly." And I turned away. The next morning, headlines called it the Carter collapse. It became one of the biggest scandals in the country, a case people would study for years. Some people asked why I didn't take the money, why I didn't cut a deal. The truth was, I didn't want his fortune. I didn't want his house, his cars, or his name. I wanted him stripped of everything he used to make me feel like I was nothing. I wanted the world to see the man behind the mask. And I got exactly that. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I didn't celebrate. I just stood in the back of the courtroom, watching him slump in his chair as the judge read his sentence: 38 years in federal prison. On the day they took him away, my father didn't look at me. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. I walked out into the sunlight, the sound of cameras clicking behind me, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. They had disowned me like I was nothing. But in the end, they were the ones who lost everything. And I made sure they begged for mercy. Mercy I never gave.